For the first part of the chapter, we're going to work on a simple attack similar to what you'd find in an old Zelda game. You press the attack key and the sword hits forward, kills the enemy in one shot. We're going to work on the health after that. I invite you to open the start project you'll find in the course. In this one, we have static enemies that inherit from the character scene we built in chapter 1. The player and the dummy are both characters. They are very similar. If you open the scene, you will see the same hierarchy with the direction visualizer to help us see where the character is looking. And as far as the code is concerned, the boilerplate only has the character changing direction. If I go to the script editor and open character.gd, you will find the direction code we worked with in chapter 1 in the physics process function. And we do have template code for the idle state. Again, same thing from chapter 1. With this, we can focus on attack mechanics and start designing our sword. Let's start by creating the sword, the weapon scene. We're going to create a new scene that's separate from the player and the character that every character may or may not instantiate. Think about it. We may want to have NPCs who don't have any weapon at all, in which case they don't need to have a weapon script, the ability to attack, and all that stuff. Let's create a new scene. We'll start with an area 2D. Control A to add your first node and type area 2D. Area 2D are nodes that can detect collisions with other shapes and bodies, but they will not collide directly. If you use a kinematic body for a weapon or a sword, it will get stuck into walls, you will have collision bugs, so you really don't want that to happen, especially if you animate it by hand, which we're going to do. Rename the area to the weapon. It will be our base weapon scene. And let's save it in the characters folder. You have a weapon folder where there are 2 sprites to help us get started. So save it there. Head to the characters folder, weapon, and let's instantiate one of the weapons. We'll start with the sword. Place it at the center of the screen. As we need to detect collision, we need a collision shape and an animation player as well that we'll use to animate the sword. So let's add these 2 nodes. Control A again. Let's start with the animation player. And next up, we need a collision shape. This time, we're going to use collision polygon 2D. It's more flexible than collision shape 2D and a bit easier to use as well. Make sure that it's a child of weapon and not of the animation player. Also move the animation player up. I always place it there so that it's easier to select. Now I'll make sure that the sword's origin is centered on the sprite. We have to add a collision shape. Click on the collision polygon 2D node. In the toolbar, you will see 3 icons that let you create, select, or remove points. Let's select the first one to create points, and we'll use the grid to help us place the nodes faster. Press the G key to toggle the grid on, and S to toggle snapping. The snapping icon is in the toolbar. You'll see it turn blue when it's active. Now we need to change the grid, because as you can see, it does not fit our sword. Let's change the grid steps to something much smaller, like 4x4 pixels. This will help us place the points a bit faster. When you create a collision shape for a weapon, don't hesitate to make it slightly larger than the blade or the element that needs to collide, but not smaller. Let's do this. Make it just a tiny bit larger than the sword itself and try to make it symmetrical as well. You click to add points, and when you click on the final point, the shape will close automatically. Now, if I cancel, there's another way to close the shape. With collision polygon 2D selected, I'll click again to add my points. And for the last one, right click to close the shape. And when the shape is done, you automatically jump to select mode, where you can click and drag on points to move them on the grid. With the collision shape done, press G to hide the grid. With that, we are ready to animate the sword. We're going to animate the sword attack in one direction, and then we will use some simple rigging technique to rotate the sword along with the character. Let's click on the animation player and make sure that you have the animation tab open at the bottom of the screen. Click the Add Animation button to create our setup animation. You should always start there. This course is not about game animation, but you need to separate the setup of a character or an object, its initial pose or state. And in Godot, you don't have an automated system for that yet, at least. So you have to create an animation, call it setup or whatever you want, where you key the position and the state of every channel or property you are going to animate. Let's click on the area to the object. Make sure that you have location, rotation, and scale in blue in the toolbar. Then press the insert key to insert keys for these three channels. By default, Godot will ask you to confirm the creation of 3 animation tracks. To deactivate this, go to the editor menu, editor settings, and we're going to look for the animation tools and check the confirm insert track property. On top of this, we're going to animate the visibility of our sword. The sword will be invisible when the character is walking, and it will become visible only when the player attacks. Instead of handling this via code, we can do it visually in the animation editor. On the area node, go down to the canvas item visibility section and click the key next to visible. In general, you can also click on the modulate property. It's one you'll use often. And in the case of our sword, we're going to animate the area to the node, and the collision polygon and the sprite will scale accordingly. It will work in this example. So we don't have to modify other nodes right now. In Godot, animations force the properties to be set to certain values. I'll select the weapon here, move it, rotate it. If I click anywhere on the timeline in the animation player, you will see it pop back to its rest pose. This is because we have all these keys in the animation. Godot is forcing all these properties to be reset to the keys we created. This way you see why we have this animation. Click the duplicate animation button to create a new animation, and click the rename button next to it to rename it to attack. Later in the course, we'll have other attack animations, so we want to differentiate them. Select the rotation degrees track and click the dustbin icon to delete it at the bottom right of the anim editor. Same thing for modulate, we will not use it. In a typical action game, a fast attack is between 0.15 and 0.3 or 0.4 seconds. It's very fast, only a few frames. A medium attack may be between 0.5 and 0.7 seconds. It may be a bit slow already. And the slowest attacks you'll get may go up to 1 second, up to 2 seconds maybe, but then that's a lot of lag you induce in the gameplay. You'll have to experiment with these timings, but we'll start with 0.35 for our straight attack with a step of 0.05. Click and drag on the zoom bar to zoom in on the timeline. And with a smaller step, we can place keys a bit more easily on the timeline. Currently, in Godot 3.0, we have to snap to time intervals. In the future, you may see real frames instead. In 3.1, the anim editor is likely going to get improved. So now we will animate the sword coming from the left and going to the right. So let's add a few keys for the attack animation, and I'll explain how the anim works after that. Go to 0.15 seconds roughly, select your position and scale keys. You click and drag over them. Note that the editor in version 3.0 is a bit finicky at time, so you may have to shift click on the keys, then right click and duplicate transpose. This will create a copy of the selected keys at the cursor position on the timeline. Now go back to the first keyframe at the start of the timeline. Make sure you have the move tool selected and click and drag to the left to move the sword. This does not update the keyframe for you. You do have to press insert in Godot 3. Maybe in the future it may change. If you want to use the move tool that you select with the Q key, make sure that you click this icon to make the children non-selectable. This way you will not select the sword sprite or the collision polygon 2D by accident. Click and drag on the handles with the Shift and Alt keys down to scale the sword down as well, and press Insert. When you have a continuous line on an animation track between the keys, this means the keys are exactly the same. But if there's an animation, you will not see anything drawn between two keys. Now click and drag in your timeline to see the sword move forward. You can press Shift D to play the animation as well. The animation is a bit too static. Let's go back to the start of the animation and select all the keys. We'll edit the keys by clicking the bottom right icon and head to the transition tab to modify the way the values animate. By dragging the curve to the left, you will make the values go up faster and slow down as the sword hits its target. Press Shift D to see the result, and now you'll see it bump forward with a bit more thrust. When you hit someone, well, I hope you don't, but if you punch in the air, your fist will go a bit farther than the final position it will rest at. Your muscles cannot completely hold the strength and the power you put into your moves. So you will tend to go a bit farther than your resting position. It's very subtle and it happens very fast, and then pull back a little bit. The same is true if you use a sword. In general, for attacks, we create two keys at the peak of the attack. I invite you to go one step later in time than our second keyframe and duplicate transposed again. Go back to this key, and we're going to move the sword a little bit to the right, just a little bit, and scale it a little bit more as well. For that, remember, you click on the handle and Control Shift Alt to scale it uniformly around its center. Now press Insert so it gets keyed, and you will see if you drag, the sword goes farther and then moves back to its resting position. Now let's play back the animation. It'll have a little more oomph, a little more power to it. Let's make it even faster by moving the keys one step to the left, 0.15 seconds. This way, the animation will feel almost instant. Now, the length of the animation will control the time the character stays in the attack state. By using animations, we're going to hit multiple birds in one stone. We control the visibility of the character, position, scale, so everything that's visual in nature, but also the duration of the attack, which is much easier to do with animations than via code. We'll have to test out the gameplay. 0.35 seconds is a little bit slow for a fast attack. I would say we can go down to 0.3 seconds, and we'll try this out when we have the code in place. Before we jump onto the code, we have one last animation to create to control the visibility of our sword. Go back to the setup animation and duplicate it again. This time, we'll name this animation idle. You can keep most of the tracks as is. It's going to reset the sword, but the visible key will be a bit different. So click on it to select it, and in the right panel, select the key tab and change the value to off. When you modify the key in the key tab, contrary to modifying a property in the inspector, The animation keyframe updates instantly. And we'll also change the length of the animation to the minimum because we don't want the animation to keep playing. We just need to set the visibility to false. In the code, every weapon will start in its idle state. It may be visible for another weapon. For example, if you are using a bow, you may want the bow to stay visible. And when the character attacks, we will move to the attack straight animation, in which case the sword will appear, hit, and move back to the idle animation where the visibility will toggle off again.